De-escalation through escalation, or simply more war to stop war? 1 year on, Israel is expanding its war against Hamas in Gaza, which has already killed some 42,000 people and wounded nearly 100,000 more. It has stepped up attacks in Lebanon and other regional countries, inflicting more civilian casualties and raising concerns of a full-blown regional war with its old foe, Iran. It is feared that Israel may target Iran's nuclear facilities in response to Iranian missile strikes in Israel last week, itself a response to a series of actions by Israel, the latest being the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in southern Beirut. As the war enters its second year, how has this conflict escalated so quickly? What's next? Why does the prospect of peace appear ever more elusive? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Professor Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University, and from Oklahoma by Joshua Landis, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Welcome to the two of you to this program. Let's first look at the human cost of this conflict. We're counting from October the 7th till of last year till this year. On the Israeli side, some 1,200 people were killed, some 250 were abducted by Hamas, and about 100 still kept as captive there. On the other hand, as a result of Israel's military action, some 42,000 Palestinians living in Gaza have been killed, and 1/3 of the identifiable victims are children, and 1/5 of them are women. Professor Zhang, let me go to you first. What are your thoughts on this anniversary as we are marking it? Why has the civilian death toll, especially women and children, been so high?
So indeed, the ongoing conflict in Gaza has led to a severe humanitarian crisis, as you mentioned. And unfortunately, despite the criticism from the international society, international organizations, humanitarian crisis has actually right now been neglected. And also Netanyahu is trying to pursue a tactic of absolute safety. And by doing so, his method is to eliminate all the Hamas militants. But the thing is, in Gaza, it's very hard to differentiate between people to people, and especially to identify all the Hamas people. And right now, actually, a lot of infrastructure have already been destructed, and including the hospitals, also schools, and that is why even like the people, when they go to the hospitals, they can't get enough medical supplies, and which is going to even increase the problem of pandemics, diseases, etc. And also, I think we need to note the indiscriminate attacks in this conflict, which is becoming even worse. For instance, in Lebanon, we have seen that the pagers can become weapons, which means that people's daily communication facilities can also be weaponized, which is going to cause even more problems.
Josh, what is your answer to this question? How come the civilian casualties, especially children and women, are particularly high this time? Of course, on the Israeli side, the civilian casualties is also very high.
Well, this is a very vengeful process, and Israel is seeking, Netanyahu and his government are seeking total victory, but much more than that. They are laying down the law. They are showing that they can smash Gaza, put it back to the Stone Age, as they've said, and there's a lot of vengeance, and that has, I think, accounts for the fact that the destruction has been so massive in Gaza, and we've seen all the universities have been blown up, even those that were empty. Hospitals have been attacked. All the press have been attacked and shut down. So this is a real scorched earth campaign. And I think that's what explains for the high death roll of particularly women and children.
What has led to this, what we're seeing now? Because we have seen this is a conflict that has been brewing, that has been going on for decades. What sets this conflict apart from previous conflicts in terms of the intensity of the conflict, in terms of the loss, the heavy human loss? Again, Professor Zhang.
Right. Actually, indeed, there are a lot of losses, just like what happened before, which is a very unfortunate scenario. But I have noticed that actually this war is very different from the previous ones in several aspects. So, for instance, the conflicting parties right now, they not only just compete on the real battlefield, but they also are launching a war of public opinion on the internet and social media. So, for instance, that is why we can right now see the casualties and what is going on in through like social media or the internet, and that is why it has also attracted so many intention, which is very different from the past. It's not that in the past there were no casualties, but just they were not communicated and fully covered. And also right now, it's like although Israel has demonstrated its military superiority and their intelligence abilities on the physical battlefield, the brutal war scene has been spread through the short videos or through the social media. And that is how the narrative structure of the Palestinian-Israeli issue has actually changed right now. And that is one important difference. And another one is that in terms of the conflict and who are participating, it's very interesting that this time is very different because right now Iran is playing a very big role. Because in the past, we often say it's a Palestinian-Israeli conflict and also it's an Arab-Israeli conflict. So the problems between Israelis and the Arab people. But right now, it seems that the Arab countries at the government level at least keep a very low key. But instead, like Iran this time has taken a more hardline position, and also most of these militant groups that are anti-Israel right now, they're quite close to Iran. So actually, this means that the conflict, the focus is a little bit different from before.
Josh, what is your take? Because we're talking about the outbreak of this crisis in October last year, when Hamas inflicted unprecedented damage and killing the number of Israeli civilians is also unprecedented, and unleashing also Israel's scorched earth policy, as you described, massive destruction and unbelievable human losses. But what has paved the way for the conflict to break out, to erupt in such an intensive and massive scale?
I think there are three factors really we can point to. One is, as you say, the brutality of the October 7th attack by Hamas really shocked the Israelis. They had gone to sleep. They thought they had Hamas contained and Gaza well enclosed. So I think it shocked a lot of Israelis who believed they really turned the page on the Palestinian issue. The Abraham Accords were moving ahead, and they really believed that their situation had surpassed the Palestinian issue. So this woke it all up, and Netanyahu wanted to reestablish an Israeli sense of dominance in the Middle East. And I think for a while, many Israelis were fearing that they had lost their real edge. And so this is an attempt to reassert that edge. Secondly, Netanyahu's government is extraordinarily right-wing. He has got a narrow government that wants total victory, that is quite messianic. They believe that all of Israel should be taken and settled in by Israelis. So the violence in the West Bank and other places has also grown at a tremendous rapidity, because many of his ministers are extraordinarily right-wing, and they want to smash the Palestinians and make sure that there's never going to be a Palestinian state. The third factor is that President Biden is extraordinarily devoted to Israel. And we're in an election cycle. And I think that's the key factor for understanding America's behavior in this, because America has refused to restrain Netanyahu, and he understands that he has a moment to fulfill his lifelong ambition, which is to make sure that there will never be a Palestinian state, that Israel will be able to annex all of Palestine, and and that he can subdue Israel's enemies. And so the weakness of President Biden at this moment, because he's in an election campaign, both America's political parties are competing with each other for pro-Israeli votes and mostly pro-Israeli money. Of the top 25 major donors last cycle to the election cycle in 2022, roughly 3/5 of all the top donors were pro-Israeli donors. These are billionaires who are giving 100 million, some instances $100 million to candidates, whether they're congressional, presidential, and so forth. This is big, big money, and the president needs it. Both presidents do. So they are going to follow Israel and allow Netanyahu to make America's foreign policy on this issue, as we've seen. And that allows Netanyahu a moment in history to fulfill his legacy and to destroy the Palestinian resistance and Hezbollah, and I think to take on Iran and to try to strike their nuclear capacity. So he has a real moment in history, and he's going to go after it.
Well, let's talk about the goals that the Netanyahu government has been pursuing. Namely, they have proclaimed 3 goals, which are eliminating Hamas, securing the release of Israeli captives in Gaza, and ensuring that the Palestinian enclave will not pose a threat to Israel's security. 1 year on, has Israel achieved these goals? Are these achievable goals in the first place, Professor Zhang?
Actually, not really, because actually, as you've mentioned, there were the 3 objectives proposed by Netanyahu at the very beginning. But till now, even after a year, even after tens and thousands of people have been killed, right now, none of the objective has been achieved. And for instance, the hostages are still there. And that is why even in Israel, a lot of people are right now, they are launching anti-Netanyahu protests and criticize him for not paying enough attention to rescue the hostages. And also, it's very ironic that right now, so even these 3 objectives have not been achieved. And right now, Netanyahu has proposed the fourth objective, which is to fight against Hezbollah in Lebanon and to escalate the conflict with Lebanon. So right now, as you mentioned, actually, so none of the 3 objectives are easy ones, especially the demilitarization of Gaza and also the elimination of Hamas, because Hamas is actually not just an organization, but it's an ideology. Right now, it's like Israel has already killed the former leader of Hamas, Haniyeh, in Tehran. But right after that, Sinwar has become their new leader. It's like whenever a leader or an important commander has been killed, they're going to put a new one to replace the original one. And also at the same time, the Hamas is like, it's always like reorganizing itself, and more people can join. And also a very worrisome situation is that right now the seeds of hatred have already been planted. So even the younger generation has been mobilized right now. So it's like the sentiment, the anti-Israel sentiment is there. So it's very hard. And also that is why within the Israeli army itself, there is a huge debate. And a lot of people were saying that actually to rescue the hostages right now is the more, feasible, objective.
More achievable.
But actually right now, achievable, right? But right now it's like Netanyahu has placed it at not at the highest place of his foreign agenda.
Well, Hamas's leader, as Professor Zhang just said, Hamas's new leader, Yahya Sinwar, stated on Monday that the anniversary of the Gaza war, that Hamas's armed ring is ready for a long battle of attrition. And as we speak, Hamas is still capable of firing rockets at Israel. Josh, how do you look at the objective, the stated objectives of Israel's military options over the past year? And has Israel embarked on the important journey to make itself safer in that region?
Well, it depends what you mean by safer. Israel describes what it's doing in Gaza and the region as mowing the lawn. And the problem with mowing the lawn is that it grows back. And these resistance groups, whether they're Hamas or Hezbollah or others, will grow back. They can be beaten down, which is true, and mowed. And that may quiet them for 5 years, 10 years, we're not sure, through Israeli dominance. But the wish for total victory, as the Israeli government demands, means that you don't negotiate with your enemies. And that means there's never a resolution. You can defeat them, but you can't destroy them entirely, because a new generation, as we've just heard from Professor Zhang, is going to grow up with these same resentments. And the real problem for Israel is that there are 7 million Palestinians living in historic Palestine. 5.5 million of those Palestinians are in the occupied territories. They have no rights to self-determination. They're under military rule. And the settlers are stealing their land day by day. They're being kicked out of villages. They're being restricted. Their lives are traumatized. And this is a recipe for turning the rest of Palestine, turning the West Bank and East Jerusalem into a Gaza, which is what Israel is doing. And it's only going to breed more resentment, more hatred. And this will lead to constant conflict.
Is it possibly Israel's thinking and strategy that they will just operate in this war in this way in the future because there is no other better option for them, Josh? Maybe this is how they say, okay, this is how we're going to operate. We just continue mowing the lawn.
Yes, I think that is how they believe that they're going to operate. They've convinced themselves that they live in a neighborhood of savages. And we heard of barbarians. And this was the word that Prime Minister Netanyahu used over and over again when he visited the United States, and he uses it on TV all the time. That this is not a clash of civilizations, he said. It's a clash of civilization against barbarians. And therefore, the West needs to support us to kill the barbarians. And this attitude, of course, does not lead to any kind of a peaceful resolution to conflicts with Syria, which lost a lot of territory in the Golan Heights, and the other countries which have lost territory and seek to have their territory returned, and the Palestinians who want self-determination. So this conflict, as you say, is just going to become a vicious cycle. Israel can dominate as long as the United States is willing to make sure it has a technological advantage, has all the weapons it wants, and lots of financial support, as well as diplomatic support in the UN. And that can go on for a long time. As we've seen, it has gone on already for over 60 years.
Well, as we speak, what has this 1 year conflict and the debates that it has sparked, what has it done in terms of galvanizing the international community in support of justice, in support of the Palestinians? It seems that although Israel may have achieved certain victory on the battleground, on the International Court of Public Opinion, it has not done well, Professor Zhang.
Right, that is true. So as I mentioned, right now, there is not just a physical battlefield, but also there is a discourse battlefield, and a lot of debates are ongoing. And actually, it has changed the discursive and narrative structure in the world. And as you mentioned, right now there are more and more criticism from the international society, but unfortunately, right now, Israel does not, or I would say Netanyahu's government does not care much about what the international society has to say. And so right now it also has huge debates with the United Nations, for instance. And also it's very ironic because, and it's not just ironic, but also it actually hinders the United Nations to play its role. So, for instance, there are a lot of United Nations peacekeepers in Lebanon, but right now they are threatened and they are really at risk right now. So I would say that right now, what the international society is worried about is that the international law and the international regulations and also the values of like human rights or humanitarian crisis have not been respected.
Josh, how long can it go on like this for Israel? Because what we're hearing is almost an absolute minority supporting Israel and Israeli actions, and the great majority of members of the international community are increasingly vocal, the latest being the International Court of Justice issuing a ruling calling Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories unlawful, and on top of the resolutions that we have seen, numerous resolutions that we have seen on the General Assembly. These are not binding, but you do see a very strong international public opinion support for the Palestinian people. Is Israel really ready and willing to continue go down this route, and is that going to work out in the long term in Israel's interest?
Well, that's the million-dollar question here. I think from Israel's point of view, Europe doesn't really count. President Macron of France just recently said that there should be an arms embargo, and he was really looking at the United States because France gives a minimal amount of arms to Israel. So does Germany and others. They're important, but they're not that important compared to what America gives. And even without Europe, Israel can turn to the United States. And the United States has really doubled down on giving arms to Israel and military support to Israel. There has been no let up in the full open door policy of arming Israel. The only thing that could tip the balance really today is China. But of course, China's military and China is really focused on its near neighborhood, and it's left the Middle East to the United States. It is not competing. Of course, its military is building up quickly, but it's not strong enough to compete with the United States in the Middle East. And that leaves the door open for countries like Israel, which has Americans backing, to destroy its enemies. And it can destroy them over and over again, as long as it has the complete superiority in weaponry. And we look at Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. These countries that have opposed Israel in the past are in rubble. They've been largely destroyed as they've gone through civil wars and are laid waste. So the countries that have been resistance countries and have opposed Israel have gotten really crushed, Libya included. And we might see that Iran gets a really bad thumping in the future. But that's to be seen. The question then is, over the long run, can Israel sustain this? And one would think that it cannot, that it will be isolated eventually. But it's hard to see who's going to do that. Who is going to force Israel to make peace with its neighbors.
Well, a recent report from Brown University in the United States indicated that the U.S. government has spent at least $17.9 billion US on military aid to Israel since October last year. It's higher than in any other year since the U.S. began granting military aid to Israel in 1959, while at the same time we keep hearing the United States government or government officials talking about proportion in reaction, including the latest by Harris that the United States, needs to, that Israel need to matter how it protects itself, meaning you can protect yourself, but how you do it matters. What really is hindering the United States to do the right thing and say the right thing at this moment? Josh, once again, I know you said it, but it seems that they
Yes,
are.
well, it is. It's really the money in politics in the United States. Money is crucial for any election, and elections cost. The local elections even cost tens of millions of dollars now, but presidential elections cost hundreds of millions, and you have to raise that money from people. And donors are allowed to give as much money as they want, as long as it's not directly to the candidate. They can give it to interest groups that
as
do
time is very
advertising.
limited, Josh, as time is very limited, I got 3 minutes left. How do you predict the future? I mean, in 1 month's time, is there going to be a major change on the ground for the Middle Eastern region?
No, I fear not. Harris has promised that she will support Israel. The advertisements that Harris is sending around to the Jewish community in the United States have her hugging her husband, who is Jewish, saying, you can trust Harris because she's married to a Jew, she loves Israel, and they have her quoting saying, we love Israel and so forth. We're always going to back Israel. She has not separated herself from Biden at all in this election. And Trump has tried to outbid her. And just recently, when Biden said, you shouldn't strike Iran's nuclear facilities, Trump said, yes, you should. You should strike them and worry about what's going to happen later. So they are outbidding each other on who can support Israel more.
Given these prospects, Professor Zhang, do you see China's role stepping up? I mean, China traditionally does not have very strong leverage on the Middle Eastern issue, but China has been coming up with proposals, for instance, the latest being a 3-point plan. How do you see China's role continuing over the next year, let's say? Keep it short, please.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say China is facing difficulties because right now it's like if China does not do much, then it is criticized for not being a responsible power. But if it tries to play a constructive role, then it will also be criticized for being challenging to the United States dominated regional order. And the second thing I would say is China is really taking a different approach and is trying to make a big contribution because right now China believes that you can't solve the problem by ignoring its roots. And right now it advocates that in order to fundamentally solve the problem between Palestine and Israel, the most important thing is to return to the two-state solution. Now, a lot of people are saying that it is not possible to achieve it, but China believes that to achieve this goal, the first thing is to resolve the issues and the conflicts between Palestinian parties and their different factions. And also it requires ending the domestic fragmentation and achieving international reconciliation and international recognition of Palestinian statehood. And right now, China has made tremendous efforts both by trying to facilitating the negotiations between different Palestinian parties and also to contribute in terms of the international recognition of Palestinian statehood by promoting the Palestinian statehood in the international organizations like United Nations.
Certainly, China will keep trying to play a constructive role in its own capacity, but this is going to be a very complicated issue, and we'll keep a close watch on the situation. Many thanks to my guests, Joshua Landis, Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Oklahoma, and Professor Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai. Thank you very much. And with that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.